When I was 3 years old and living with my mom at the time, we bounced around a lot from house to house. We ended up moving into a house that was just a few blocks away from my dad. I just want to state that these are my very first memories. I don't remember anything before this house. That's how traumatic that it was for me. But I'll do my best to explain these experiences in an adult version because I was 3 at the time and still hadn't learned to talk very well. So we move in, and I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening right away, but soon I would start seeing this red man or bad man or fireman. My mom told me that's always what I would call him, because I have very little memory of what I would call this thing. I vividly remember it wanting to hurt me. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that I wasn't safe every time I saw him. Sometimes he would chase me down the halls or come through the walls, and I would run to my mom trying to explain what was happening. My mom said that I would run up to her crying and shaking, saying that the bad man was trying to hurt me. This thing kept going on, and eventually something else started happening. Every time this red man would try and hurt me, this new entity would show up. I say entity because I couldn't tell its gender, and I don't remember it having a face, but it was like it was a glowing ball of light that would chase away the bad man every time he was around. This went on for months before I finally moved in with my dad. Because I was so scared constantly, I actually developed a stutter and my whole body would tremble. One day while living at my dad's, I was drawing and my mom asked if I could draw what I was seeing. I was drawing in a coloring book, and one page had an angel on it, and I started drawing circles around it because I couldn't actually see what it was. In my mind, it was just a big ball of white energy. I'm not Christian and don't believe in angels or demons, but I do believe in negative energies and positive ones that could maybe manifest into ghosts or spirits. So at this point, I had permanently moved in with my dad. I went to speech therapy for a long time to fix the stutter, and now, even to this day, my hands shake. Apparently, it's called trauma tremors. After moving in with my dad, my mom and brother, who had never seen anything weird like I did, just saw my reactions to it. Both started experiencing things. Not as bad as what had happened to me, but still creepy as hell. My mom would start to hear the piano play, and my uncle play the piano, so she thought that it was him playing it, until she walked over there and realized that no one was in the room. My brother would see shadows and lights turn off by themselves, but that's all that really happened to them. My mom eventually moved out of that house because too many things were going on and she really was getting creeped out. Me and her moved into a trailer, and the first night there, I was laying in bed with her, and I was apparently staring into the bathroom. I don't remember this, but my mom does. And she asked what I was staring at, and I said, "There's a man standing in the bathtub." And she then asked, "Is he a good man or a bad man?" I said, "A good man," and went to sleep right after. We later found out that the owner of the trailer before us was an old man who had died. Ever since then, I've never seen any paranormal things, but I can still sense if houses have good or negative energies. Believe this story or not, but it was very real to me and has permanently given me a tremor. When I was older, probably around 7, and could fluently speak, my family asked me if I remembered what had happened at the house. I guess they thought that I forgot or had made it up, and I told them the story in astounding detail, and it freaked everyone. Me and my mom occasionally talk about this from time to time because we still don't know what had happened. We just know it did, and that it was messed up. In 2017, my girlfriend and I moved into a tiny, kinda crappy house in our college town. The house was made by a couple of students a few years prior, so the architecture was a bit sloppy. For example, the roof was flat. Take note of this because it'll be important later. However, the house was really cheap and close to campus, so it seemed like a total steal. The first couple months living there, nothing out of the ordinary happened, but it wasn't too long before we began experiencing strange paranormal activities. The first odd occurrence was with our smoke detectors. Our smoke detectors would go off constantly. It was strange because they would go off even if there wasn't smoke in the house, from our bad cooking, for example. We thought that maybe it was because of old batteries, but no matter how many times we changed them, it never made a difference. It got to the point where they were going off 3 to 5 times a day, and at that, we just broke down and took the batteries out of them altogether. Note, there were 6 detectors in total. However, even without the batteries, the detectors were still going off. So out of desperation, we turned off the entire smoke detector circuit to the house. It was at this point when things started getting really out of control. The back room/storage room in the house always had a really eerie feeling, like someone was watching you or standing just behind you staring down at you. Thankfully, me and my girlfriend's bedroom was the furthest room in the house away from the storage area, so I avoided it like the plague. Anyways, one night around 3 a.m., the smoke detector in our bedroom goes off. However, it's not the usual repetitive beeping, it's a single, long beep. It sounded like when someone holds the test button on a detector. Frustrated, my girlfriend grabs a chair from the dining room and stands on it to reach the detector, but moments before she touches it, the beeping stops. We both groan in irritation as she goes to put the chair back, but before she makes it to the dining room, the detector down the hallway from our room makes the same continuous beep. Just like before, she stands on the chair to reach the detector, but right before grabbing it, it stops. Our smoke detectors continued this pattern all the way back to the creepy storage room. This happened 2 more times that night. It was as if whatever was messing with us was trying to lead us to its space. This would happen to us at least once or twice a week for the next 1.5 years that we lived there. Shortly after the encounters with the smoke detectors, the house became absolutely infested with bugs. There was no history of bug issues when we bought the home, and it started almost immediately after our first experience with the detectors. Bugs would pour out of light fixtures, small cracks in the walls, counters, and of course, the smoke detectors. Literally, one minute everything would be fine, and then the next, winged insects or ants would pour out of the walls. We had multiple exterminators come, but less than a week after treating the house, the bugs would be back, just as bad as before. It made us miserable, and I've never seen an infestation to that extreme. It was absolutely unnatural. After these events, we began feeling really terrified and depressed. We both hated being home, but there was no other place for us to go. This was when the footsteps started. Remember how I said our roof was flat? At least a few times a week we would hear large, heavy, possibly hoof-like footsteps on the roof. We tried writing it off as being animals, so whenever we heard the steps we would run outside to see if we could spot whatever the animal was. But there was never anything there. The steps were very far apart from one another. Whatever was walking on our roof would start from the creepy storage room and in maybe 3 or 4 steps walk to our bedroom. The steps were so loud that it sounded like whatever was haunting us was either very big or stomping to get our attention. Now began the phantom sounds. We had large metal bowls that we used for daily cooking, so when we were done we would wash them and set them on the counter to dry. The first time it happened, me and my girlfriend were sitting on the couch in the living room. The kitchen was right next to the living room, but there was an island that blocked our view to the sink area. Anyways, on this night we were startled by the sound of our multiple metal bowls being thrown off of the counter. At this time we didn't have pets, so we assumed the worst and thought that someone might be breaking into the house. We both shot up and ran over to face our worst fear, but not only was no one in the house, nothing in the kitchen had been moved. The bowls were still on the counter, just where we left them. This was the most common paranormal occurrence in the house, and it happened at least 5 to 10 times a day at all hours. After a while, we were so sick and tired of these disturbances that we stopped using our metal bowls, or if we did use them, we would hand dry them and put them away right after use. This didn't make the spirit very happy, so next, we started hearing what sounded like our ceramic plates being thrown to the ground, and our kitchen cabinets slamming over and over again. Do you know those types of cabinet hinges that close slowly? Yeah, that's what we had. So, to slam the cabinets like that, they would have had to have been closed with excessive force. The next phase in our haunting was sightings and photographs. The phone I had at the time had one of those automatic face tracking features, meaning that when you would take pics on my phone, the yellow boxes would appear around the person's face to focus on them. One night I was taking a picture in me and my girlfriend's bedroom when a yellow face tracker square appeared at the foot of our bed, way above our bed. If that was a person, they would have had to have been at least 7 feet tall. At the time, we did have posters on our bedroom walls, so while focusing on the face tracker square, I circled the room to confirm that the tracker wasn't just focusing on one of them by accident. To my dismay, no matter where I was in the room, or from what angle, the square stayed in the exact same place. Oh yeah, even better, I was home alone for a few nights. I don't think I've ever experienced such sheer terror as I did when I went to sleep that night. After this first encounter, having cameras track faces in our pictures became a constant occurrence all throughout the house. The final phase of our haunting before getting the heck out of there was physical encounters. This happened more often to my girlfriend than me, but something would occasionally grab and pull our hair, especially when we were walking through the living room. But the most terrifying experience goes to our friend Jamie. She came to visit us for a few nights, and while she was there, she would sleep on our couch. She was aware of all the paranormal encounters in the house, and she had seen most of them firsthand, but nothing compared to what was about to happen. It was around 3 in the morning when she woke up with an eerie, uncomfortable feeling. All of a sudden, she experienced what felt like someone or something stepping up onto the couch. It stepped both of its feet up, one on either side of her body. Starting from her feet, it slowly walked up the length of her body until it felt like 2 feet were on either side of her head. She said she felt an intense, malevolent energy staring down at her, but she was too terrified to open her eyes. Meanwhile, the cabinets in the kitchen began to slam over and over. For the next few hours, she pretended to be asleep all the while this presence was standing over her. She told me she's not exactly sure when it went away, because she eventually became so exhausted that she did fall back asleep. Not too long after this experience, we were finally able to sell the house and get the heck out. We lost tons of money because we sold it for way less than we had originally paid. I can't help but feel bad for the person who bought the home, but it's been almost 3 years and she's still living there. I think the takeaway from this story is if a house is priced too good to be true, then it is. I have these dreams sometimes. Sometimes they're warnings, and other times they're just odd. I started noticing that they weren't normal when I was about 8, and I started having the same dream every night. My parents were freshly divorced, and my mom had moved into this yellow house. The heater didn't work, and every window was broken. She wouldn't allow us near the windows because she was afraid we'd get cut. This house was mostly normal during the day. The buzz of the fan above the stove while Mom cooks, me and my sister playing, the TV on, just seemed normal. But every night, that dream would come back. It wasn't a bad dream, just one that I really don't get. A native man, who looked like he was probably a chief based on the headdress, would walk into the house through the front door. He would look at me for a long time before opening every cabinet and drawer, and then would exit through the back door. I had this dream for a week or two before telling my mom. But I went to her one day and I said, every night I have a dream that someone opens all the drawers, cabinets, and doors, and it's really starting to creep me out. She looked at me and told me that she had woke up and had to shut every door and cabinet and drawer that morning. Then, when I was about 10, my uncle was hospitalized. All of our family was staying together in one house so that we could all help each other out. Our uncle was a big part of our lives and really kept the family together. The adults went to visit him, and all us kids stayed home with one adult who stayed behind. When they came back, they told us very little about my uncle's condition. They just said he can't wait to be back home. That night, I dreamt that I went alone to find out what had really happened. I walked into the hospital room where my uncle was, and I said, "Hey, Uncle, it's me, your niece. How are you?" And he said, "Who are you? I don't have any family. I don't remember them." I spent the rest of the dream trying to convince him that I was real. It smelled like hand sanitizer and old people. I woke up crying and screaming. I don't know why, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. So I asked my mom and aunt, "Why did you lie to me? Uncle doesn't even remember us." They asked me how I knew. I dreamt another time that my mom was wearing all red. She was so confident and pretty, and I remember telling her in the dream that she looked really nice. And then her boyfriend came out. He started fighting with her, asking why she was wearing that slutty color. "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right? Now you know what? I don't want to be with a woman that dresses like that. Have fun being single." I woke back up, and she was wearing all red. I begged her to change. I said, "Mom, something bad is going to happen," because I remembered how much she loved him, even if I hated him. She didn't listen, and a few minutes later I was hearing, "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right?" All over again. Things like this stopped for a while. Everything was peaceful, and I didn't read into dreams too much. Until last year, anyway. Last year I had a strange dream that my current boyfriend was in. At the time of this dream, we were only acquaintances. We had just barely met. The dream was unlike any of the others, because I wasn't all the way asleep while I was having it, and I found that I could not move. Other things happened too, but I'll get into that later. The dream starts with me walking to the bathroom because I had to pee. Then I make the decision to leave the bathroom door open because no one is home. I have the quick thought to myself, "Don't leave that door open," but I ignore it. It's gotten to the point where it's time for me to clean up and wash my hands. But when I look out the door as I'm about to get up, I see my current boyfriend. His head is tilted to the side, and he's saying, "She's here." He says it very creepily and matter-of-fact-like, but it doesn't sound like him at all. He continues and repeats himself. I say, "Who? Who is here?" But when I engage in the conversation he's trying to have, what he says changes. He starts saying, "Her heart is here." At that point, across the hall from the bathroom, my bedroom door swings open to show me a little girl. But she's not a little girl at all. She took my voice. I tried calling out for everyone. My dad, my sister, the neighbors. Nothing would come out until I called for my mother. But calling for my mother was useless. She lived an hour and a half away. I woke up calling for her. I figured it was a sign to visit, but we weren't on the best terms. Anyway, around the time Halloween was supposed to be celebrated, my cats started acting really weird in my room. I started feeling uncomfortable staying in there. I couldn't breathe in there after that dream. My cats would scratch at the walls, and sometimes would hiss at my closet for no reason. On Halloween night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dreams I was gonna have, so I took NyQuil and passed out in a record 17 minutes. I figured I'd be asleep all through the night, but I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw someone standing next to my closet. It looked like my mom, but I wasn't sure. I shut my eyes and refused to open them because I was terrified. When I woke up, without telling my mom anything about what had happened, I asked her what she had dreamt of. And she told me, "I dreamt I was standing next to your closet. Something's not right about that closet. Maybe you should come visit for a while and give yourself some space from there." I want to make it very clear, I never told her anything about this closet. I didn't tell her that I saw her when she dreamt she was there. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't tell her about the cats. So I came to visit after about a month, around Thanksgiving. I had been sleeping in Dad's living room or going to friends to avoid my bedroom. I couldn't wait to sleep in a bed. Everything at Mom's was wonderful. We had movie night, talked about things, and just got caught up. So when I came back to Dad's, I actually hadn't slept. I was so happy to be at Mom's, I had just stayed up the whole time. So when I got back, I was pretty exhausted. I went to my room because I was feeling better about it. I turned on my nightlight, still terrified of the dark, and opened my bedroom door. I will die in a fire before I shut that door when I'm inside the room, and laid down to go to sleep. Instantly, the dream took me, before I was even all the way gone. I felt someone hug me and start to kiss my neck. It felt like someone I knew, and I wasn't bothered by it. But the second I relaxed into the hug, it got tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I realized my nightlight wasn't on anymore, and the faint glow from the hallway wasn't much. But it was enough for me to see the closet door open and these odd creatures come out. Short, undefined. Any lines that defined them were just white lines on their shadowy bodies. I felt that they were going to hurt me, and again I was terrified, but I just woke up, and then it was over. I looked over though, and I realized that my closet door was still open, and my nightlight was off, even though I had shut that door and turned the light on beforehand. I had a weird series of encounters as a child in my hometown that I have since moved back to, and I just chalked it up to sleep deprivation mixed with having a vivid imagination. This first one happened when I was really little. I'd say in 2004 maybe, 2003. I suck with dates. This was one of the first experiences that I had, and it's pretty fuzzy. All I really recall is being at the top of a flight of stairs and jumping down the whole thing, almost as if I could float down. I looked back on this one and I thought that maybe I had fallen down the stairs and just didn't remember. But in that case, I would have gotten a ton of scrapes and bruises because it was a big wooden staircase. Likely not related to the other experiences I had, but still, weird. There was some weird stuff in between these two, but I'd rather just get to the meat of it. Anyways, here's the biggest one that really bothers me. When I was in middle school, I was incredibly rebellious, and decided to try running away from home in the fall of 2014. I got up in the middle of the night, and just decided to walk straight down the road. Not sure what my plan was there. Anyways, I ended up following the highway until I ended up around Thunderbolt, east of where I lived, and was stupidly proud of myself for not chickening out, and that I'd stopped crying. Anywho, I wandered some more, hopped some fences amid my adrenaline high, and ended up in these dense, really trashy woods. I started thinking over things, and crying again. Then I heard what sounded like my mom calling out my name from up on the highway, and instinctively ran away from it. I remember looking up to the highway and just seeing a person go limp and fall off the side and under the overpass in my direction, then start running toward me on all fours like some kind of creature. It was super dark, and I couldn't make out any features at all, and I wasn't interested in getting closer. So I just ran like the damn wind until my legs were shaking and I sat down in the underbrush. I was resting for a bit and still shaking, and crying and all that. Then I heard my mom calling my name again. It sounded like it was the exact same volume, like it was from the same distance away. It almost sounded like a mosquito buzzing super quietly in my ear. I passed out for the night, and then found my way back home in the morning. I thankfully ended up getting home safely, and all I got was bars on my window, scolding from my mom, and a sandal to the head. Oh, and sleep paralysis just about every night of my life since. People often wonder what would happen if they used a Ouija board. Some people do it for fun, some people use it for spiritual communications. I can tell you now that if you have no experience in using a Ouija board, do not do it. This is a story about what happens when you use one for fun without knowing the consequences. When I was about 12, it was Halloween night, go figure, and we had just had a Halloween party for family and friends. A few of my older sister's friends stayed the night that night, and we were just hanging out in our room, which we shared. One of her friends had a spirit tethered to her. That's what she claimed. Whether or not it was true, I still don't know to this day, and she said, "Let's go for it." I wanted nothing to do with it, but being 12 years old and curious, I had to observe. They didn't follow any of the rules that you're supposed to as far as not putting it on a blanket, not lighting the proper candles, and other things that you're supposed to do prior to using the Ouija board. They were just calling on spirits that they could think of and trying to communicate with them. That's where things got a little creepy. If I remember correctly, one of the spirits that came to the board was a woman, and she was not friendly. She began to spell out profanities, and they quickly shut that down. I can't remember what the second spirit was, but it was also not friendly and called itself Satan. All of a sudden, one of my sister's friends began to panic. She said she saw a man out on the street with a red and black face. We did not see the man out on the street, so I don't know if she was having a panic attack and seeing things or what. The next event that occurred was kind of insane and terrifying. All of a sudden, my sister started zoning out and staring at nothing. We tried to get her attention, and she gave no response. Then she got up and walked downstairs, and we were confused, so we just followed her. We heard something in the kitchen, so we went and checked that out. My sister was standing over the sink taking knives from the counter in the knife holder, and she was throwing them into the sink one after the other. We try to get her attention again, and again she refuses to respond to us. Then she goes and grabs the coffee pot off of the coffee maker and drinks black coffee straight out of it. Mind you, she hated coffee at the time. She drank the entire thing. She got up and went to sit on the couch, and a couple of minutes later, she blinked and came to. She asked us why we were staring at her, and how did she get downstairs. To this day, she has no memory of what happened, and it is 21 years later. We're pretty sure that a spirit took over her body just to have some fun. My grandma, after my mom told her what had happened, came into the house and blessed it with holy water. It seemed to help for a while, and then I had the series of nightmares a year or so later, so I'm wondering if the holy water didn't really have much effect. So this is a lesson learned and a disclaimer to anyone who wants to mess with a Ouija board. If you have no real experience with it, do not go there. You never know what you're going to be inviting into your home. This is a long one, but this is a true and factual story about my experience. I'd like to start by saying that I'm very skeptical when it comes to things people claim are paranormal. I don't just jump to conclusions that a strange event is caused by spirits, but some things I just can't wrap my head around or explain. I won't say that what happened to me and what I experienced was from a spirit, because I don't know 100%. All I know is that I'll never touch a Ouija board again, or be around one, because the experience disturbed me for the better part of a year. Also, I'd like to add that this is only one of 2 paranormal events that I've ever personally experienced that I can say 100% that I don't know what happened. Here we go, starting with the background. I used to think that Ouija boards were a load of crap. I still kind of do. I really don't know how I feel about them anymore, actually. I always saw them as a party game for gullible people, so when my friend Joe, not his real name for privacy, told me that he had one, I just laughed it off. I had only known Joe for about a year or so after meeting through mutual friends. He lived in a small apartment with his girlfriend Lisa, also not her real name, and their dog Vincent. At the time I was only 18. Joe was like 23, and Lisa was 20. For a period of time I used to go over to their place every weekend after work because Joe bought me alcohol. So one night we were hanging out, and Joe starts talking about some strange encounters he had growing up and how he, quote-unquote, attracted spirits his whole life or some garbage. I smiled and nodded to be polite while he went off on paranormal tangents and started talking about shadow people following him. He then goes into his room and pulls out a Ouija board, but not the one that you get at a store made by a toy company. It was made of real wood and hand-carved. It was actually pretty nice. He said that he had gotten it as a birthday gift from his parents years ago because of his obsession with the paranormal. I didn't inquire as to where it had come from or who made it, but like I said, it looked handmade. While I sat there laughing and joking about it, Lisa chimes in and says, "Joe, tell him about the other night." Joe proceeds to tell me how him and Lisa allegedly spoke to a demon using it, and the demon claimed that his name was Beelzebub. Me being a big metalhead at the time, he got my attention. "Let's do it. Let's try to talk to this demon," I said, half joking. Joe asked if I was sure that I wanted to try it, and I agreed. So we went into his room. We turned off all the lights in the apartment. Lisa lit candles all around the room, and we sat on the floor. I was nervous, but I was having fun watching Lisa and Joe's pageantry. It was spooky. I looked over at Joe and he seemed unsettled. I asked what was wrong, and he said that he wasn't feeling right. He didn't like the doors open displaying the darker areas of the apartment. Him and I got up and closed every door in the place, as in every room and every closet. We sat back on the floor and Vincent, the pup, laid on the bed. And we began. I forgot to add, this is very important. Before we started, I told Joe that I was skeptical of someone using their fingers to push the planchette around. So we all agreed to just use the back of our fingernails to touch it. Imagine just slightly bending your finger and placing the surface of your nail on the top. That's what we did. That way, even if you added pressure, your finger just slipped around on the planchette and didn't actually move it. We also made a rule. If the planchette moves, everyone has to lightly scratch the planchette with their nail to prove that none of us were the ones making it happen. What it looked similar to is placing your 2 fingers on a table and acting like they're legs and running in place. I hope that helps you get the picture. No one was able to move it on their own. We tried several times to ask if there were spirits with us, and got nothing. For about 20 minutes it continued that way. I told Joe I wanted to ask for someone in particular. Is John Smith here with us? Can John Smith talk to me? John Smith, obviously once again not his real name, was the name of my best friend's dad who was killed in a car crash while driving home from a fishing trip. That was when it moved, and it was absolutely insane. It felt like a great force just came to life in the planchette, like it had a mind of its own. None of that gliding around the board crap that you see in movies. This thing felt like we were holding onto a person's hand who was tugging and pulling. It was strong, but articulate movement, and it spelled out, "Hello." I asked him if he was John, and it spelled yes. I asked him to prove it, and it spelled out the name of my best friend. I asked him where he was when he passed, and he spelled Lake. I had chills down my spine. What I thought was just going to be fun had turned into being emotional and scary. Joe and Lisa knew nothing about John Smith. I never mentioned him or brought up anything about the circumstances, so they couldn't have known. I began to grow very unsettled. I told Joe and Lisa that I didn't want to talk to John anymore, so they told me to push the planchette to goodbye or whatever it was. I called it a night after that, but I wanted more. Next night, I was back. Same routine. John and Lisa set up the room. John closed all the doors. Vincent was on the bed. Lisa said that she wanted to talk to her grandma, so we did the process. It was the same incident for her as it was for me. Memory is kind of fuzzy, but it spelled out "I love you," and also spelled out some sort of inside joke that she used to share with her grandmother. Lisa was in tears. As with me, I had no info on her grandma, and Joe wasn't that cruel to make her cry as a joke. I felt powerful. I think we all did. I felt like I was finally a believer, that we had an actual way of talking to spirits. The possibilities. But then, it happened. After the incident with Lisa's grandma, we were all kind of in shock. Joe was comforting Lisa, and I was speechless. We regained our composure and got back to it. This time we were asking the normal, "Are there any spirits with us?" What usually left the planchette lifeless suddenly kicked in with great force. Scary force. The planchette moved violently around the board. We all kind of laughed nervously. We asked, "Who are you?" The planchette shot to the moon symbol. If you don't know, this allegedly means a dark spirit. We all looked at each other and then simultaneously moved the planchette to goodbye. As soon as we did, Vincent jumped up and ran off of the bed. He sat and stared as if looking at someone. We had that door closed before. Joe jumped up and said, "F this," and ran into the kitchen. Lisa and I followed. Joe about nearly had a panic attack. He rushed to turn on all the lights. I've never seen him act that way. We were all pretty scared. We don't know what happened, but we had that door closed, for sure. After some talking and calming each other down, I left. I didn't sleep that night. I had never seen anything like that. After that night, I felt like I was being followed constantly. For almost a year, I slept with the lights on. That year ended up being one of the worst years of my life. I fell into a depression and was incredibly paranoid. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was always watching me. I continued to go to Joe and Lisa's place occasionally, but we never touched the board again. We ended up having a falling out some months later over unrelated drama and never communicated after that. Like I said, that year was horrible for me. I started drinking a lot and tried to get over the feeling. I always felt like my energy was being sapped, like the air was heavy, and I struggled to find joy. The depression was real. Then the experience hit a peak. I was sleeping one night and woke up in a panic. I couldn't breathe. I felt as if someone was literally sitting on my chest. I gasped for air. Suddenly, I felt like what was someone grabbing my feet and trying to pull me off of my bed. I instantly went into a struggle, trying to kick out as hard as I could. Then all at once, it stopped. I was horrified. Nobody was in my room. I lost even more sleep after that incident. I ended up finally getting a hold on my life. I started going to the gym instead of drinking and wallowing in my pity. I started meditating instead of playing video games. After that year, it all went away. It was like I was free from that negative energy again, and I have been fine ever since. That's the story of my Ouija board experience. I'm still not sure if all of it was in my head, or if that night was just some sort of stress-induced panic attack, but whatever it was, I cannot explain it. People have told me that demons thrive off your energy, and that is what might have happened, but I'm just not sure. Perhaps it was the demon talking to us all along, pretending to be our loved ones? If such a thing exists. I'm just glad that whole experience is in my past. I'll never touch a Ouija board again, though. So, I've always had hyper-realistic dreams. I also have always believed that my dreams are how God talks to me. I know that sounds a little crazy. Regardless, the other night I had a dream that I believe is a sign. I also should say that my walk in faith has been wavering in the past year, and I've also been going to see psychics a few times a year since last December. Anyway, to the dream. I believe I was on a road trip with a couple of my buddies. We stopped at a little diner in a small town that had a psychic, gimmicky store attached to it. I was waiting for my friends to use the bathroom, and when they both came out, they both said that they wanted to go and do a reading. I said all right, and that I would wait for them to be done. They went through this black-lit corridor through a purple-curtained doorway. They came back out not too long after, all smiling and cheerful. They told me that I should do a reading, but something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to energies in general, but there was something about this place. They kept tugging me when all of a sudden the psychic came out. Immediately, all the alarms were going off in my head. She came up to me and got really close to my face. She had these bulging eyes, and her face was full of super white makeup, really heavy eyeshadow and eyeliner. Her hair was a fire truck red, and slicked back into a bun with feathers and things sticking up. She was really freaking me out, but I was like, alright, whatever, so we start. She grabs me by the shoulders, and we make very intense eye contact, and she starts telling me a bunch of things like I have the gift, something that I already know. And we start backing away almost like a dance, and then we both get on all fours and drop down on our bellies, and she starts to slither toward me. Literally, slithering, without using her hands. This is when I know something is actually really up. I stop everything. I stand up, and am telling her that I'm done. She is still slithering toward me. She then slithers all the way up my body until her face meets mine. Then she says, "Let me show you the way." I say no. This makes her super angry, and she picks me up by my throat and keeps chanting, "Let me show you the way, let me show you the way." She starts running with me in her hand, and the room keeps elongating, so she keeps running. Then snakes start coming out of her sides, and they burrow into my skin. I feel the pain of them digging into me and biting me. I'm grabbing onto her wrists, and I scream, "No! There is only one way. God is the way." And I scream this while making eye contact, and she starts screaming bloody murder. And I get the strength to gouge out her eyes with my thumbs. More snakes and spiders begin pouring from her eye sockets, and I scream that again, that God is the way. And that's when I woke up. This happened around the end of November of last year, while I was at a late-night party at a mutual friend's house. The night started off fine, with us having a few drinks and talking about the classes that we would be taking next semester. This pretty much went on till around 2 a.m., and by this time I wanted to go home since the party was already dying down and most of my friends had already left and I was practically there alone. Instead of wasting money on an Uber, I decided to walk home since my neighborhood was only a few blocks away, but it was still a decent walk. However, there was a shortcut. There was a secluded dirt road in the neighborhood which led to a stretch of walkway with an irrigation canal for crops, and it happened to lead straight to the backyard of my house. I began making my way to the lonely dirt road, and I started to second-guess my decisions since that stretch of walkway can be pretty shady, especially at night since a few drug dealers and junkies like to hang out there. I mustered up the little courage I had, feeling confident that I'd be able to handle myself if anything ever hit the fan, so I proceeded to walk on the desolate road. The night sky was well lit. The moon illuminated my surroundings enough for me to see my environment pretty clearly. The walk was actually pleasant. The only thing that made it tough to navigate was the overgrown, thorny weeds and mesquite branches that kept scraping against the exposed parts of my skin. As I continued to walk through the brush, I finally got to the clearing that led to the bridge, and to my relief, there didn't seem to be anyone in sight. As I began to cross the bridge, I then picked up a faint scent of lavender mixed with something rancid, like the smell of a good cheese or days-old roadkill. I couldn't even tell where it was coming from, but as soon as I made it to the other side of the bridge, the environment seemed to suddenly shift. It's hard to describe, but there was this heavy pressure that washed over me, like being submerged underwater, coupled with this gut feeling telling me that something about the environment was just off. I pushed the feeling off as a random anxiety attack, since I do get them sometimes, but deep down I knew this was different. To calm my nerves, I stopped walking and did slow breathing and began to count to 10 while clenching and releasing my fist to try and shake off this bad vibe or whatever it was. When I finished my little ritual, I felt a little better and more at ease. I started to walk in the direction of my house until I heard this odd grunting sound come from behind me. I turned around, and I saw a woman with short black hair and a silky white gown crouched down with her back turned away from me. She was just a few feet away, and it was strange because when I crossed the bridge, I didn't see anyone around the area. Did I pass by her without even realizing it? I thought to myself. She was hunched over, after all, and I do tend to get caught up in my own little world. At this point, the faint smell from earlier was just overbearing, so much so that it started seeping into my sense of taste. I covered my mouth with the bottom of my t-shirt, trying to shield myself from it, while I yelled out the muffled words, "Hello, ma'am? Do you need any help?" She paid no mind to me as she continued to make that weird grunting sound, and I was creeped out at this point, so I walked away a couple steps and turned to get a better look at her. She then decided to stand up, still with her back turned to me, and muttered the word muerte, which means death in Spanish. Confused, trying to understand what the strange woman had said to me, she then slowly turned to meet my gaze, and all the blood in my body pooled in my gut when I saw her face. It was extremely long, too long for a normal human body to be supporting it. The head of this thing almost resembled that of a horse or a donkey's head, and the eyes. I'll never forget the eyes, as much as I've tried to. They were gaping pits of blackness surrounded by a sea of red. Complete silence fell over the area as I was petrified by what I was witnessing. My brain, a scrambling mess, was trying to make sense of the unnatural abomination that was before me. The creature then decided to let out what I can only describe as a high-pitched scream, like a cross between a pig squealing and a woman's wailing. My fight-or-flight reflex then kicked in, and I started sprinting to my house. I didn't even bother trying to unlock the gate to my fence. I jumped over it with ease. My grandmother saw when I came barging into the house. The words wouldn't even leave my mouth to tell her what I had seen, as the fatigue quickly kicked in after the adrenaline wore off. But afterwards, I described everything to her. With a look of urgency, she then decided to perform a cleansing ritual. The ritual involved rubbing an egg all across my body in 3 circular motions while chanting a special prayer. She then cracked the egg that she was using into a clear glass cup that was half filled with water, and when she did, the egg came out with streams of blood, and the yolk that came out of the egg looked similar to a human pupil, which is a very bad omen for the person who is being cleansed. After seeing this, she laid her hands on my forehead and chanted another prayer for about a minute, and threw the raw yolk out of our house and into the driveway. She didn't bother to say anything to me until the following morning, when she reluctantly told me that what I encountered was an entity that specifically preys on men, kind of like a succubus, and told me that this thing had a very dark and malicious intent, and that I was lucky to have gotten away from it. To this day, I haven't set foot on that stretch of road again. This is a story from my life that I've told to people, especially teens, to warn them to never use a Ouija board. When I was a senior in high school in 1989, my brother came home from college on spring break and told stories about him and some friends using a Ouija board. It had done some things to freak them out, so we dug out the one that we had in our attic. I don't know why we had it or where we got it from. He showed me what they had done, but nothing happened to us. I brought it to a friend's house and we tried it out a few times over the course of several evenings, and then about the third or fourth time, it really started to pick up in its responses. We had been starting by knocking 3 times on the corner of the board and saying something like, "Come, spirit," or something to that effect. Anyway, the marker really started to move around the board and spell things out. I always tell people that it was either our subconsciouses or a spirit moving it around, because I was certain that neither of us were moving it intentionally. With a light touch of a few fingers from each of our hands, it would just move around on its own as if it had its own personality. We would ask it all the usual questions, test questions, and curiosity ones. One day, though I wasn't a fan of it, my friend asked the board in which years we would each die. It spelled out something like 2040 or 40-ish for my friend. I don't actually remember the number, just that it was far into the future at the time. And 1990 for me, which was the next year. I asked, "Does that mean that I'm going to die in 1990 and my friend in 2040? No, it said. Then I asked again, this time switching the years around between us. Yes, it said. We asked the spirit about itself. It claimed that it had died the year my friend's father was born, and said that its name was Stephen Crane. We kinda laughed at that part. Of course, I looked up some dates about the author after that, but things just didn't seem to jive. I just thought, well, it could be another person with that name, and moved on. We started to invite other friends over to watch, who are all entirely skeptical. By the end of the evening, every single one was freaked out. More and more friends would come each night until we started getting a huge group of people. The board would answer plenty of test questions wrong, but then, for example, while everyone's reacting to the wrong answer and half paying attention, it's spelling out, "sorry." Another time, for example, in a lull between activity while people were distracted and chatting, it moved slowly to S, then kept circling around to H, until it came to a stop there. There was nothing else for about 2 minutes. The entire room of people was completely silent, and then it slowly moved to OK. It said a bad spirit had passed through the room. Once again, everyone freaked out. It didn't like this one friend, and every time he entered the room, when we had those gatherings, the marker would twist and move to the opposite side of the board. Other things like that happened. Again, it was like it had its own personality. I remember a few times driving home with that thing in the backseat of the car, terrified, with my heart pounding. One time I asked it, "Where will I go to college?" It spelled out one of the schools I was applying to, and then 37. I asked it if I was going to go to that school and get a 3.7 GPA the first semester, and it said yes. I was sure all along that my friend was not moving it intentionally, but I had proof, because one day he was really disturbed and frustrated with his girlfriend, a friend of mine. He had suspected that she was cheating on him, and he asked the board a question about her while using it with a friend, and it told him to turn on the TV. The video for the song, What You Don't Know Might Hurt You, by Exposé, was playing on TV. I remember that he really took that to heart, and it affected his trust in their relationship. I always knew that he wasn't just playing around with the board, and that was a sort of hard proof to that fact. We started to actually use the board with our friends, but it only worked when one of us two used it with someone else. We asked the spirit why that was, and it responded that the spirit was inside my friend and that I was the owner of the board. Freaky stuff thinking back on it now. But as an 18-year-old, you think differently. Anyway, the enthusiasm started to peter out after a few months, maybe near the end of the summer, and I don't really know what happened to the Ouija board. I did end up going to that college that the board mentioned, but it didn't really catch my attention. When I got home from my first semester after 1990 had just begun, I got my grades, and had a 3.7 GPA. I don't remember if I made the connection or not, but I certainly did when the next thing happened. Around the same week or so, maybe even around the same day, I got the annual catalog that my college sends out, with articles and updates and whatnot. I opened it up, and there, right in front of me, was an entire article about Stephen Crane. He had gone to my college for a while, and I never had any clue about it. I remember having chills. Finally, the sad part is that later in 1990, after returning to college classes after Thanksgiving break, my friend, one of my best friends, died suddenly and unexpectedly from a heart problem. I don't know when I made the connection with the board, because by then it was over a year later. But at some point, I did, and when I did, I started to put the whole storyline together. It sank in more how creepy and dark the whole thing was. I am happy in life, very blessed. I did go through a form of spiritual growth some years ago where this darkness was left behind, and the story of my past doesn't haunt me. I share it in the hope that it's helpful for others. But I would never touch a Ouija board again, and would strongly advise against anyone else using one. To this day, I'm still positive that it was not our conscious action at work, but either our subconsciouses or truly a spirit. Whichever of those you might believe that it is, nothing good comes from playing around with either one of them. At the minimum, negligence can open up a path for psychological and emotional problems. At worst, relating with a spirit can let in a darkness and fear beyond your understanding or strength that can tint your life and affect you for quite some time to come. My grandparents died about 10 years ago. They both died peacefully of old age and left an old house in a countryside. That house has a lot of great memories. My best Christmas and birthdays. Despite that, recently I've started having nightmares that would always have the house in them. Sometimes someone's chasing me, other times there are ghosts. It's always basically a horror movie scenario. Being religious, I thought it was about time to visit my grandparents' graves and light a candle. It's about a 3-hour drive, so I decided to visit them and crash at their house for the night. Well, I'm never doing that again. It was still bright outside when I arrived. I went inside to open the windows and clean up a bit. That's when I heard a weird sound. It was as if someone was walking in the room, but no one was there except me. I was spooked, but I convinced myself that there must be rats or other creatures in the attic. I managed to stay calm and rational, and spent the rest of the evening watching YouTube in bed. That's when the fun started. The internet connection is terrible there. You kinda have to walk around the room to catch 4G like some sort of Wi-Fi. Like many times before, my internet lagged, and I ended up sitting in silence. This is when I heard it, loud and clear. There was someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the light switch. I was sure it was that switch, because whenever you turn on the light in the kitchen, it made this loud click sound. I literally froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was about to be killed by some maniac. All the knives were in the kitchen too, and I only had pepper spray in my bag. Then the intruder started walking, slow steps as if they were just wandering around. I thought I will die from fear, and I didn't know for how long that I was frozen, but it really did feel like forever. I was literally waiting to be killed. I don't know how much more time passed, but it was long enough that my muscles started spasming from being so intense and not moving. I gathered all courage, hoping that the intruder had left, and somehow managed to go to the kitchen. The light was on as expected, but the person had already left. I ran to the door, expecting to see it wide open, but to my surprise, it was shut down and locked, as I had left it. There was no sign of entry. I'm never going back alone. You have no reason to believe me, and you probably won't. I don't care. I just need to speak my truth, as it weighs on me sometimes. Since it happened in July, I told myself that I would take it to my grave out of fear. Fear of my significant other, family, and friends thinking that I'm crazy and ostracizing me. I have no history of mental illness, and I don't take meds, but I also just don't want to scare them. In July, around 10 to 12 a.m., I went to the kitchen with a blanket over me to grab a fork and a drink. I was carrying the drink in my right hand and the fork in my left as I struggled to keep the blanket wrapped around me. As I was heading back to the living room, I realized that the downstairs light and the ceiling light were on. I turned off the downstairs light with my left hand and looked to confirm that it was off. The ceiling lights were closer, so I continued on to turn the ceiling lights off behind me while looking down the stairs. The ceiling light flickered and burnt out, and I froze. A blue light appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and I cried, but it wasn't out of fear. I was already in a good mood, and it felt comforting. I stared, and tears continued to pour down my cheeks. In awe, I walked left past the corner and stood there and continued to cry. For 3 minutes I stood there like that, questioning what I had seen. It appeared instantly after the lights burnt out. Could it have always been there? Who knows? I doubted my sanity, and by the time I went back to look down the stairs, it was gone. As much as I try to forget, the emotional attachment to what happened always helps me remember. I had to make a decision that night. Carry on with my life, or keep asking questions that I didn't have the answers to, and let it consume me and destroy me. I accepted that I may never know what it was, just that it is my truth, and I don't want to be afraid to share it. I was 19 years old and a trainee manager for Sainsbury's, a UK supermarket chain. I was working with a colleague on the shop floor, looking down the aisle. I saw a 30-something-year-old mother pushing a very severely deformed child in a wheelchair. Although I wasn't aware then, but since have become aware. I wasn't aware then, but since have become aware that the child had probably been born with hydrocephalus, leaving its head distended with fluid. The child also only had one arm, and was sort of curled up in the chair as if pained. As they passed us, we pulled our restocking trolley out of the way, and just as they were adjacent to us, the child let out a terrible sort of howl. To be honest, it left me shaken for several minutes. 2 or 3 days later on the weekend, I was invited to a party at a friend's place. Just a quiet meal and drinks with a few people that I knew. After food and a few drinks, the girl whose flat it was suggested that we try the Ouija board that she had recently bought. I was a total skeptic of the Ouija, although agreed to play for a bit of fun. It was a proper sort of wooden painted board, although there was no pointer, just a small crystal glass that those playing put their finger on. After about 20 minutes in, I thought it felt a bit odd the way that the glass felt like it was gliding so smoothly over the board and actually spelling out some of the responses to questions, and even claiming to be a local spirit of our town. We carried on for a while, and, although weird, nothing about the responses were threatening or unpleasant. My friend turned to me and said, "Ask it a question that nobody here or anyone else would know the answer to." I thought for a few seconds and spoke aloud. I was thinking of the child in the store, and I said, "What did I see at work the other day?" I felt the glass move under our fingers, and it said quickly, very positively, "Effing evil troll child." I felt physically sick, and was actually heaving. I jumped away and fell onto the floor. I then blacked out for a few minutes, resulting in my friends calling an ambulance in panic. When it arrived, I had calmed down a bit, and they just checked my vitals and left. My friend drove me home, and although I was all right, I had nightmares involving that child for several months. Today I believe that there are definitely consequences to messing with that sort of stuff, and it is absolutely best left well alone. That was over 25 years ago, and I remember that incident as if it happened just yesterday. This is a 100% true story that happened to me when I was about 12. I lived in a really small town in central Wisconsin with my family. My mom had gotten divorced when I was 8, but it was her and her boyfriend and all my siblings in the house, minus the 3 oldest. I had finally gotten my own room since the 3 oldest moved out, and was so excited, but for the first couple months I didn't sleep in there because I was too scared, so I would sleep with my sister in her room. As we were getting ready to move out of that house, I finally worked up the courage to sleep in my room by myself. My bed was positioned so that when I laid down on my back, I was facing the door. This night in particular, I had kept the bedroom door open because it was a really warm summer night. I remember waking up sometime in the night. I have no idea what time it was, nor do I think I would remember even if I had looked. Anyway, when I woke up, I turned over onto my back and happened to glance outside my door. When I did, I saw this black silhouette of a man who I thought looked just like Abraham Lincoln, tall, thin, with what looked like a top hat and a beard. He was standing right outside my door next to the railing that led to the stairs. I remember staring for a moment, but getting freaked out and covering my head with the blanket and going back to sleep. Fast forward about a year to where we were moved into our new house, a small mobile home in the middle of nowhere, and I had a dream. In the dream, I was back in the old house, my childhood home. I remember all I could think was, I'm home. It felt so calm, so familiar. Everything was exactly how I remembered it, down to my messy room. In my dream, I went exploring through the house, reminiscing. I was so glad to be back, but then I woke up. It was such a nice dream, but I eventually forgot about it. And that was when I had my second dream. It was roughly a month or so later. I was back in my old home, but something was off. As I was walking through, I realized that things were missing. The china cabinet in the dining room was gone, and so was the stereo we had in the living room, and so on. Just little things. It didn't feel as familiar or as happy as the last dream that I had had, but when I woke up yet again, and just like the last time, I eventually forgot about it. Fast forward again to probably 2 or 3 months later, and I had another dream. I was back in my childhood home, surprise, surprise, and again things were missing and the whole energy just felt off. I remember feeling very uneasy and uncomfortable there, but I couldn't leave. And then I saw it again. The Abraham Lincoln-looking shadow that I had seen a year before. He was just wandering the halls upstairs. I got really freaked out and tried to leave, but then I woke up again. And again, I forgot about the dream not too long after. Finally, just a few short months later when I was staying at my grandparents' house, I had what would be the last dream. I was back in my old home again, and this time, everything was gone. The whole house was empty. It probably looked like that because that was how it looked the last time I saw it, right before we officially left. But anyway, I was walking through the house feeling so creeped out, and again like last time, just wanting to leave. It no longer felt like home. Then there was this man or figure. It didn't look like the shadow that I had seen before, but I couldn't make out any features either. He asked me if I was okay, and I said no, and that I wanted to leave. Then he asked, "Would you like to leave with me?" and held out his hand. I got such a bad feeling from him that I said no. He started promising me that if I went with him, that I could go back to my childhood home, back to what was so familiar and happy to me, but I refused, and then I woke up. After that, I told my sister everything, from the shadow man that I saw first, to all the dreams that I had. At first, we thought that maybe I was having some sort of psychic visions, but a few years later, I found out the truth. I found out that the silhouette that I saw was a shadow person after I watched a video by Haley Reese on what they are. Then a couple more years later, after meeting my boyfriend, whose whole family is very into the supernatural, I found out what the whole thing actually meant. He explained to me that demons often come to you in dreams to attempt to possess you. They'll start by creating a situation that's familiar and comforting. But after a dream or two, they start adding or taking things away, slowly, so as not to make it obvious. You start to become uncomfortable and threatened and scared, until one time they're the only thing that makes you feel safe. And that's when they have you. They'll promise you everything good you could ever want, and as soon as you say yes, you're saying yes to them taking over your body. My boyfriend explained that I was very smart for saying no, and for telling my sister. Because by telling my sister, I basically broke the demon's hold. That's apparently why back in the old days, people would tell their dreams to someone. Because it basically breaks the hold of whatever demon or spirit may be trying to possess you. It all started when I was 5 or 6 years old and had an imaginary friend called Bombo. He was a small Victorian boy who lived with his mother, who I said lived under the floorboards, in the house that I grew up in. I used to talk and play with him all the time, teaching him about things like my Velcro shoes and some of the toys that I had. It was no secret to my family who Bombo was, and even what he looked like, or at least from how I had described him. One day my sister, who was 14 years old at the time, went back upstairs to our shared room after a family day out, and saw him standing in the corner of the room staring at her. He was exactly how I had described him, even down to the detail of his clothes. A few years passed, and I was now 10 or 11 years old. Our family had moved house a couple of times, and now lived in a 3-story house in a village just outside my hometown. I always had a weird feeling about that house from the moment we moved in, but didn't think much of it over the excitement of having my own room on the top floor that had a skylight. After a few months, things started to get strange. My things would disappear, I would hear footsteps on the middle floor landing at night, etc. These experiences progressively ended up getting stranger, with sounds like nails being dragged up the railings on the top floor getting worse and worse, as well as some nights my little sister, who was 3 at the time, screaming, saying that there was a man growling at her in her room, although my family put that down to an overactive imagination and didn't really think anything else of it. It was quiet for a couple of months, before everything came back again. This time, it was much worse. This was the first time I saw it. One night I was in my room watching TV and getting things ready for school the next day. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a face peering in at me through my skylight. Its skin was dark, and its eyes were white with no pupils, only veins, dark circles around its eyes leading to black cracks across its face. It was grinning at me, and even without pupils, I knew that it had its eyes locked on me. Needless to say that after a few seconds of initial shock, I ran downstairs to the rest of my family and refused to go back into my room. Shortly after this, my older sister, who had given birth recently and was living with us temporarily, had her own experience. As she was sleeping one night, she heard a knock on her door between 2 and 3 a.m. Thinking I was the one knocking, she shouted, "What?" twice, with no response. The door flung open after a few seconds with such force that the dresser had dented the door from the impact. No one was there. Shortly afterwards, we moved again for personal reasons to the house that we have now been in for years. For years, there was no unusual experiences other than the occasional sound of footsteps. Nothing that could be logically explained. When I was 18, my sleep schedule was the same as any teenager, waking up around noon and going to bed around 3 to 4 a.m. This one night in particular, I was up doing the same as always, listening to music, watching films, etc. At midnight, I went downstairs to the kitchen as usual to get some snacks. On my way back out of the kitchen, I saw it again. It was standing behind the front door looking in through one of the glass panels. It was the same face that I saw all those years ago. Same skin, same eyes, same dark circles and cracking features. It was staring right at me, this time with one of its hands leaning on the other glass panel as it watched me. The only difference was that this time it wasn't grinning. After standing there for what felt like an eternity, I ran as fast as I could up to my room and locked myself inside. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Some family friends who were regular churchgoers theorized after they heard what I saw that this thing that I saw was Bombo, or what had taken the form of him in the first place, and that when I had stopped giving him my attention and energy, he had then tried to use another way of getting my attention. I don't know what to think for sure. All I know is that what I saw was the exact same thing that I saw as a child, and it came back. It's been 4 years since the last time I saw it, and I hope I never see it again. I don't think this was paranormal, but it felt so real that it undid many of the knots in my heart. My father passed away 21 years ago, when I was 20 years old, leaving behind his mother, my grandmother, wife, my mom, and a daughter, me. 2 years before his death, my father had urged my grandmother to sell her small home and shift with us so that we could look after her in her old age. He built a decent house, considering he came from a very poor background, that we had to sell off after he passed away. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. I often used to think about how our life would have been had he been still alive. He was an honest man, but in a powerful position. When he passed away, I was still in college and unmarried, with no exposure to the outside world. Had he been alive for a few more years, I could have used his guidance to fulfill my career plans. He was the only earning member of the family. After he passed away, nothing remained the same. We all struggled financially, emotionally, and ultimately physically. Then I got married to a verbally, financially abusive man. But I saw this dream only yesterday, never before it. I had not been thinking about him or of any of my difficulties before I went to bed. In the dream, I was in my grandmother's house, which again we had sold 23 years ago. She had passed away, but my father was alive. He was sadly looking at the empty house from his childhood. I asked him what he planned to do with the house. He said he would probably sell it, but he sounded very sad as he said it. Then I suggested if we should keep the house and just rent it out. This way, we could return to it whenever we want and have a financial backup too. My father said that in the face of financial difficulty, we have a bigger home to fall back on. But he seemed relieved that he didn't have to sell his childhood home. When I woke up, I realized that it had all felt so real, as if I had lived an alternate life. It was what life could have been. I cried, but I also felt that I had been lucky to be able to live in that life. Does anyone believe in alternate lives here? Do you think my soul had made a trip to an alternative life somehow? When I was in middle school, I went to a friend's birthday party sleepover where we did the typical girl things like painted nails, did makeovers, and watched a movie. It was all normal until my friend suggested that we make a Ouija board. On a sheet of paper, we scribbled out yes, no, goodbye, along with numbers and the alphabet. She told us all the rules, and we nodded in agreement that we would follow. I remember the first movement happening, and I looked across to the girl facing me, insisting that she had moved it. She said that it was not her that moved the clear pebble that we were all using as a planchette. We asked it dumb questions like who we each liked and if our crushes liked us. Typical middle school girl things. I don't remember much of these sessions other than a particular name, Wanda, and that we had asked her if she was a demon and that she had told us that she was not. After a while, this was no longer scary and we began to enjoy it more and more. I remember feeling so excited, like I just wanted to keep on playing as if it were a video game. The next day I told my dad about it. My family was pretty open-minded about those things, so he wasn't mad or ashamed, he just wanted to make sure that we were all safe about it. Fast forward, and I was in my first year of college over at a friend's place for her birthday, and she had talked about how she found a Ouija board and that we should try it. I was a little hesitant as now I realized the true implications. We eventually started setting boundaries, but I was still hesitant to believe that the planchette was actually moving on its own. My friend asked questions like, when's my birthday and what's my name? I shifted to questions not about myself, tending to ask about the entity rather than me. My friend suddenly asked if the spirit knew my deceased grandfather's name, and it spelled out Lewis. I was in shock because none of my friends could have known that. I know that I hadn't directed the planchette to the letters, so I was surprised to see that it was correct. Later on, another friend of mine had said that she felt something grab her foot under the table. I was right next to her, and I didn't feel a thing. At that point, I was like, okay, let's say goodbye and call it a night. It was all just too weird. I've never had a truly bad experience, but it's still very creepy, to say the least. This is a real story in this area. People actually report seeing this. It's a tale that comes from a little town in Lancaster County, a place called Elizabethtown. It's called the Purple Light Bridge, and it's a story that began in the early 1900s. Could be more than a tale, though, since there is proof of the purple light and the tragic incident behind it. So one of the tales is that a young boy is struck by a train on the bridge that intersects between Turnpike and Road Street, which is where the train station for Amtrak is. It supposedly happened in 1934, and some people claim that there is proof of the accident. So after the boy's death, it is said that late at night you can see a purple light on the bridge or in the gorge where the train track ran into from the north heading southwest. People like to argue that you can see the light at another location, and that it's been there not only by the train station itself. They claim that you can see the lights under the bridge that is above the train tracks on Bossler Road. Bossler Road, for this purple light, had another tale. A mother brought her son to the bridge, and under that bridge, she hung her son, and then herself. Locals say that the purple light that you see is the mother and the son, as one energy. Some people have claimed that the purple light comes from the moonlight reflecting off of the rocks below. Yet even more people claim that it's actually the bridge a couple miles away in Newville near Elizabethtown. I have not yet tried to investigate, but certainly intend to. This won't make sense until later in the story, but my brother's room is on the second floor of my house. He has a door that leads up onto the roof, and it's pretty high up, so there's no way to get up there. Anyways, this was when I was around 13 or 14. My twin brother got a Ouija board recently, and me and my friend always used it. One day we decided to play with it like usual, just because we were bored. My brother went into the shower, so it was just me and my friend in my brother's room. We started using the Ouija board, and nothing really happened. It starts moving, and I usually move it, or he does, because we were dumb kids. This time, I wasn't moving it, so I just assumed that it was him. For 5 minutes, nothing happened, but we started asking the spirit to do something to let us know that we were there. This is when it got weird. Outside the door in my brother's room, the one that leads to the roof, me and my friends started hearing humming and singing sounds. We got pretty scared and kept asking questions to the Ouija board. After that, there was a subtle banging or tapping kind of noise. One of the drawers in the dresser behind us opened. We said goodbye and put it away. Haven't used it since. Back in the early 80s, my then boyfriend moved into an apartment in Brockport, New York to be closer to his college. It was a nice 2-bedroom. The building was about 5 years old. It overlooked the parking lot of some plazas, with a burger monarch that he worked part-time at. Every night, from the time we moved in until I moved out, I had one of 3 creepy dreams. One involved being back at my parents' house, where the stairs up to the attic are in my closet, and either an infestation of snakes or something oozy and rotting was sort of slurping its way to the stairs to make its way down. The second dream was of being lost and unable to find the apartment building. The big kicker dream involved it being moving day, and as I walked around trying to decide where to hang the spice shelf, I noticed black and red writing and smears on the walls. I remember thinking to myself in the dream that they should have been painted over. The night before I moved out, the dream continued with me being in my bedroom, and there was a guy in a hooded robe standing and leaning against the doorframe watching me. I woke up when Keith got home from his work shift, and he asked me why I didn't wave back. See, he had one of those great hooded velour bathrobes, and he had waved at a hooded figure in our bedroom window thinking that I had gotten up to watch for him coming home. I wasn't standing there, and wasn't even awake. When we were moving out, him back to the dorm and me to a different branch of my company, we found a little medallion with some of the glyphs that I had seen on the wall in my dreams. Luckily, who or whatever it was didn't follow me, and a friend warded the heck out of my new bedroom. When I was about 15 years old, I was a very curious teenager. I had only heard stories of the Ouija board, but had never actually tried it. So one weekend, my best friend slept over, and we decided to take our chances. My mom was super against me buying one, and she would have killed me if I would have brought one into her home. So my best friend and I took a big poster board and made our own Ouija board. We lit candles and turned off all the lights. It was about 1 a.m., and everyone in the house was asleep. When we started out, it was slow, but then the planchette started moving all around the board. I was convinced that my best friend was the one moving the piece around, but she denied it, and I trusted her not to lie. We asked how they died, and they just said, sick. After a bunch of other questions, we asked, how can you prove that you are who you really say that you are? They responded with, cemetery. I don't fully remember all the questions that we asked, but I know that it led to Charlie giving us some details. He said that his gravestone was by a path and a tree, small, round, with the year 1820. My mom's house is literally right across the street from a cemetery. I can look out the window and directly into it, so we are very, very close. It is an extremely old, historical colonial cemetery dating back to 1690. The next day, my best friend and I went over to the burial ground and started our wild goose chase for Charlie's headstone. Lo and behold, we found it. It was exactly as he described. His headstone was cylinder-shaped, the name Charlie was listed, and he was born in 1810 and died in 1820. Behind the stone was a huge tree, and it was right next to a pathway. I could not believe that the Ouija board actually worked. After discovering Charlie's grave, my best friend and I would sit and visit him every day after school. We would go hang out there when we were bored. Sometimes we would just sit next to him, smoke cigarettes, and talk. Maybe Charlie was just one lonely kid and wanted some friends. So that's what we gave him. Lately I've been dreaming about pretty weird stuff. I can't remember everything, of course, but I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability. About 1 week ago I started dreaming more often and I could remember them clearly when I woke up, but after about 2 days, some inconsistencies popped up. At the end of the dream I would start hearing weird noises. This, of course, didn't bother me until 2 days ago when I woke up very early, about 6 in the morning, and the sound was still there. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and noticed that my window cover, a sliding cover since my roof is slanted, was pretty much wide open. My window is right under a streetlight, so I always close it because I need complete darkness to sleep. When I jumped up and turned on the lights in my room, the sound immediately stopped. It's hard to explain the noise, but it sounded like the flapping of a piece of clothing against the window. I'm pretty sure that it shouldn't have happened because that's my only window, and there is never any draft in my room. I decided to just go downstairs and forget about it since I was probably still just half asleep. This is where it got weird. I have a little decorative Captain America shield on the desk in my room, which is next to the door. This is important. I started dreaming normally, superpowers and stuff, until I somehow made it back to my home in my dream, and in my dream I sat down behind my desk with the door open. When I look out of the door from my desk, I see the closet doors from across the hall. In my dream I remember that I started to fall asleep behind my desk, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that the closet door started to open. When I looked up and blinked, it was all normal again. This happened once more. But the third time I looked up, and the closet door kept opening. So I got scared and threw the Captain America shield at the closet door. In my dream, not in real life as far as I know. And then I jumped out of my bed, scared. When I turned the lights on at, again, 6 in the morning, the shield was gone, and lying on the floor next to me. I was very sure that that shield had been on my desk when I went to sleep. Since childhood, I've had my fair share of paranormal experiences, especially while sleeping. I've had one particular entity visit me in my dream for 1 year when I was in a different house. Never seen that entity again once I moved, even though I lived in the same area. Just a lot of weird stuff like this. But last night, I had the weirdest experience of my life. I was sleeping in bed with my wife, and I dreamt that my wife kissed me and went under the blanket. I woke up and sat on the bed with my lower body covered with a blanket. I checked on my wife, but she wasn't in the bed. That was so strange. So if my wife was not in the bed, then who kissed me? While I'm thinking about this, realizing that my wife was outside in the living room, something started moving under the covers. It was like a snake or a tentacle that started wrapping around my legs. I kid you not, I was freaked out, and at the same time I was very calm because everything was smooth and non-aggressive. It felt like something were cuddling my legs. I slapped myself to make sure that I was awake, and I was, white as day. Holy smokes, I thought. This thing is moving and cuddling in the sheets, and it was bloody real. As the thing moved from my thighs to my shins, I literally saw the blankets move with it. Then I freaked out a little more, but not enough to stop it. I couldn't help myself, I was still curious. I kept sitting on my bed while the thing moved to my shin. I felt it wrap around both my legs and just stay in that position, like a ghost hug. I moved my foot up and down, just to check to see if this was anything like sleep paralysis, but it wasn't. My foot was fine. Everything was moving. I was moving. That thing was moving, and I was wide awake. But now it was getting really freaky, and I had to get out of it. I slowly pulled the blanket off, and whatever that was, I couldn't see. It slowly unwrapped and went away. I got up and went to my wife. Told her the story, and we came back to bed. We woke up the next morning, and here I am, still freaked out, hoping that it was an act of love by whatever, and nothing more. This happened about a year ago in a park near my house. My brother and I are very spiritual and believe strongly in this type of stuff. I had this one Ouija board for a few years now, gifted to me by my old stepdad. We decided to use it one night and got in contact with a ghost. It went pretty well, and we did it again a week later. We talked to a new ghost, and the ghost from the first time. It was pretty cool and insane to experience something so real. They were very nice, and we were very respectful since we take this stuff seriously. Toward the end, we asked that they would not follow us home and that they would let us leave. They agreed, and we said goodbye. They moved the planchette, therefore they said goodbye with us. It seemed to be all going normal when we left, until my brother started noticing a weird feeling in our home, and on top of that, he said that one day he was hanging out in the living room and felt something in the room with him. It was on the couch where he was sitting, and he could see a cabinet door that he left open in the kitchen. He asked out loud that if someone was there to please close that cabinet door, and they did. After I got home, he told me this, and we busted out the board again. I know that you shouldn't use the board in your home, but I felt like we needed to know what was going on. We asked if the ghost who was in our home was the ghost from the park. The planchette moved to yes. Fast forward a year today, and we still live in the same house. We have a few experiences with ghosts and spirits in our home, but never the one from the park. Plus, I never go to the park anymore. My question to you guys is what made this follow us home? We did everything we were supposed to do, had a very friendly encounter, and they moved the planchette to say goodbye. I read that that's usually all that you need to do, but we did all that, and it still didn't work. I don't believe that the ghost was negative or evil, considering that they just left our home after a while, or at least I think, since I don't feel them here anymore. My brother is convinced that the ghost was messing with us, since during the conversation when we asked their religion, they just muttered out a bunch of nonsense. I guess that could be it, but I'm wondering if there could be another reason that they followed us home. So I don't know how many people really believe in ghosts or the paranormal, or in people who say that they can see them. I would never say that I'm some professional psychic or medium. I'm not. I just know that I've always been able to see things that other people couldn't, hear things other people couldn't, and knew things that other people didn't. Pretty much my whole life. I felt like a freak and a weirdo for a long time until I just realized this is happening and it isn't going away, so I needed to accept it. I got help from professional mediums and the woo-woo community, and it helped. Backstory, but important. I was laying in bed in my room a couple years ago, trying to fall asleep. It was a long hallway, and my sister's room was at the end, and so was my mom's. My sister had a friend over who was dealing with an abusive boyfriend, and they were drinking and talking about it. This will also be important. You know how you get that feeling that someone's watching you? Or that feeling in a store when you just know that someone has stepped into your space? You don't have to look, you just know. That's what I felt. I looked up, and there's some girl with just her head poked into my room sideways. I just saw her head sideways leaning past my door frame. She looked shorter, maybe 20s, with long black hair, kind of like the girl from The Ring. I'm looking at her wondering what she wanted, and she started to smile. Slowly, her eyes got huge and black, and her jaw unhinged into this giant, sick, pitch-black grin. Ice cold slammed into the pit of my stomach as I just stared at her for what felt like hours, frozen in fear before what I'd been taught kicked in, and I made her leave. She instantly turned back to normal and skipped off down my hallway toward my sister's room. I thought, oh, is it my sister's friend? Depression and abuse and all those bad situations can really attract those types of beings, so I didn't think anything of it. Fast forward to literally last night. It's been years. My parents got divorced, which is a whole other post of creepy shit. I realized it wasn't just my dad who was the narcissist. It's absolutely my mom, too. They were a toxic pair, and currently, I'm in a situation where I have to live with my mom. It's fine, it's free. I'll be grateful and deal with it. Last night, I'm laying in my bed watching TV, minding my own business. Suddenly, I feel that feeling again. It's always the same feeling regardless of what type of ghosty it is. For me, anyways. I look at my door, and it's the exact same girl. I asked her what she was doing here, and she didn't respond. She just started smiling. Only this time her eyes went white, and her mouth grew into the same huge black grin, but she had tons of teeth, like a shark. I get up to get my incense, which drives them out, and she runs in the direction of my mom's room. I go out into the hallway to look in that direction, and I see through my mom's cracked door this weird demon girl literally sitting crouched on top of my mom, staring at me. Almost like she was an animal claiming her prey. It was wild. I've never ever seen anything like that before. I also realized that this girl was never with my sister's friend. She was with my mom for however many years. But my mom's a crazy and very, very negative person regardless of what anyone does to help her. She loves drama and loves being a victim and loves complaining, so it's matching her energy, I guess. This ghost girl feels more like a bully than anything truly demonic. Like she had fun picking on people, which my mom absolutely does too. This ghost girl can't hurt me, she's just around, and man, it sure is scary when she is. She looks like an absolute demon, that's for sure. I've since seen other types of entities in her room at night while she slept, and have told her about it. She says I'm crazy at first, and then in the days that follow, she'll tell me how it feels dark. This happened to my dad, who told me this story when I accidentally discovered a Ouija board in a closet in our house. He was living in Spain at the time, and during the 1970s, he bought that Ouija board. He told me that one day he talked too much with a wise entity who responded to everything so clearly and philosophically. The thing is, my dad asked it, "Where are you?" And the board started to mark random numbers and letters such as 1652AC, 8820, that kind of thing. My dad, who was consternated, thought that it was decontextualized. Nonetheless, and he cannot explain why, he wrote down the entire random series of numbers. And letters on a paper that he had left sitting on a shelf. The disturbing part after that is that a few years during the 1980s, later, my dad was watching Cosmos with Carl Sagan, and he told me that in that show, Sagan explained that scientists had discovered a new galaxy that was called with a sequence of numbers and letters. My dad was so impressed, so he copied down the name of the show and he looked for the paper on the shelf. And yes, it was the same sequence. My dad is fascinated with this experience and told me that the Ouija is not just spiritual, it is also interdimensional. When he told me, I was between scared and curious, and I considered aliens using the Ouija board. He still believes that this wise entity is up there somewhere, talking with others. It is not uncommon for me to have dreams about shadow people, or to have sleep paralysis. On this particular night, I had a dream about a red marble, and that an entity was tied to this said marble. I felt that I had to protect this marble and keep it away from people who were trying to get it. The marble bounced out of my hand, and I told the entity to roll it back to me, which it did. Here is the weird part. I remember in my dream picking up the marble, but all of a sudden I was staring up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow person approaching, and it started to lean over me, looking down. At this point, I have no idea if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming, but I remember saying over and over again, "Leave, leave, leave, leave." But the voice started to sound deeper and deeper, and not like mine at all. My boyfriend sleeping next to me shook me awake, and I sat up, calmed down, and went back to sleep. In the morning I asked what had happened, and he said that I was talking in my sleep, and that I had said a sentence that was all jumbled, so he couldn't make out what I was actually saying. This made me feel weird, because if I did sleep talk, I would have thought it would have been one word, over and over. I remember in my dream feeling uneasy and scared. Does this sound like I was visited? Or was it just a really bad case of sleep paralysis? Edit. I also forgot to mention that I told my mom about the dream, and what time that it had happened, and she said that she had had a terrible dream, and woke up screaming around that same time. We sleep on different floors, so I didn't hear her do this, but she doesn't remember her dream. My dad and I decided to go to this store one day to buy incense, and we meet this woman that I think owns the shop, and she's weirdly interested in the color of my eyes. My eyes are a weird color, they're yellow and green, but she was telling me that they're so bright that they're deceiving. Well, fast forward to a few weeks later, and I'm in my room asleep. My mom is awake, and when I woke up, she told me that she saw a woman, perfectly described her as the woman from that shop, astral projecting into our house, and went in my room and tried to take me. My mom had never went to that store, had never seen that woman, so that's how I know she wasn't lying. My mom and dad weren't on talking terms at that time. But ever since then, I get really weird nightmares involving her in them, and they occur every night, and I can't get them to stop. They always involve her taking me. I had just moved into a new place, and I was living alone. I bought a Ouija board and played with it my first night there by myself. Nothing really happened, so I stashed it in my dresser under some old jeans and forgot about it. A few weeks later, I was having a party and suggested that we all play with it. Everyone agreed. I went to get it, but it wasn't there. I was dumbfounded. I'm pretty tidy. I know where I put it, but I could not find it. I couldn't explain it, so I just said that I had misplaced it. I had basically forgotten about it by the next morning. Fast forward 6 months. As I'm going to bed, I lie on my stomach. I slide my arms under my pillow to get comfy. My hand hits something. It's the planchette. I have no idea how it ended up there. I threw it out, and I have never seen it again, but I fear that whatever happened with the board, and the fact that I was an edgy teen, opened something up. I was into all that black magic crap. I've done lots of rituals with seemingly no results. There's a lot more to this story. Basically, my roommates and I were terrorized in 2 separate houses by something that we cannot explain. Like it was following us. All I know is that it looked like a little girl, but I don't think that it was. I never believed in this kind of stuff, but it's hard to deny what we all experienced. This happened last night. I am currently car camping. I woke up last night for a whiz, and while I was doing my thing, I could see a floating, irregularly shaped light off to my left, about 2 meters, 6 feet, away. I didn't feel scared, more of a what is that kind of feeling. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, so please bear with me. Its appearance was kind of like a parallelogram, except the short edges were jagged and ripped into 2 long appendages. It was kind of a milky white in color, with no light emanating from it. It floated in a straight line and came to a tree where it did 3 little hops and then disappeared around the tree. I finished my business, but didn't have my phone. I did have a flashlight, so thinking it was someone in the trees, I shone the beam through the trees, but nothing reflected back. I turn around to go back and get in the car, and the light thing is dancing around the back of my car, right beside me. I was able to walk up to it and try to touch it. I say try because my hand just touched the car. But the even weirder thing was that when I touched it, my hand created a shadow over the top of it. It was like it had no feeling at all, like just going through air. After it floated around the car, it disappeared around the side, and I lost sight of it altogether. I climbed back in the car for sleep, but was incredibly baffled, and prepped my phone just in case that thing floated through the window. I just had the scariest experience. I lost my ex over a year ago and had bought a Ouija board in desperation out of longing to communicate with him. I tried countless times, and it never worked, so I stored it away. Yesterday, my current boyfriend's good friend passed away. Suicide. I didn't know him very well. Today, I had a random thought to maybe try to communicate with him. I pulled out the Ouija board and asked to speak with him. It wasn't working until I closed my eyes, and then it started to move. It went to yes. I then asked it to give me a sign that it was really him. It went to the number 9. When I asked what this meant, it just kept going back to the number 9. As it's moving, I heard my cat hiss. I opened my eyes, and my cat was over the Ouija board hissing at it. My cat has hissed maybe twice in his entire life. I about pooped my pants and asked to say goodbye. I was already freaking out when I called one of my friends and they said 9 is an upside down 6. Now I am absolutely terrified. I live in South Africa with my family, and we recently moved into a 2-story house. My room is upstairs. Simple room, really, bed facing the sliding door. Just outside the sliding door, I have a small area where I can smoke. To my left, we have a view of our indoor pool, with an almost UV light type of effect. Now, to my problem. It's been 2 weeks in this new place, and something is following me. I know I sound crazy, but it breathes very, very hard. Last night I went to bed at around 11 p.m. after watching some memes on YouTube. I woke up with a rather foul smell. I honestly assumed I had farted in my sleep. But as soon as I stood up to open the sliding door, I felt it. I swear I am not crazy. I felt something breathing down my neck, and the smell got worse. I've been working at a funeral home for about a year as an assistant, and will be starting up my apprenticeship next month. I have had several weird encounters since working there, but nothing to write about until tonight. I got back from picking up a dissident around 8:30 p.m. I wheeled him into the prep room, and as I turned around to close the door behind me, I heard a man's voice. The voice either said, "I'm here," or "Come here." I wasn't too freaked out. Weird stuff happens a lot. However, this is the first time that I have actually heard disembodied words. This isn't the most exciting story, but I definitely thought that it was worth sharing.